Welcome to today's podcast. We're diving into a fascinating and somewhat controversial topic, the use of wartime laws to deport migrants in the U.S. As discussed in a recent article, quite a heavy topic, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The idea of repurposing wartime legislation enforcement raises serious questions about ethics, legality, and the broader implications. It challenges how we interpret laws originally intended for very different circumstances.
Right, the article mentioned how Trump officials defended this approach, arguing it's necessary to protect national security. But isn't it a bit of a stretch to apply wartime laws designed for combat scenarios, to civilian migration issues?
That's a valid concern. Wartime laws like these were designed for emergencies, often granting extraordinary powers. Using them in this context could set a dangerous precedent. What happens if future administrations misuse such laws?
Good point. But defenders argue that the border situation is an emergency in itself. They claim the influx of migrants poses risks to national security and public safety. Do you think that water?
I see the logic, but defining migration solely as a security threat oversimplifies a complex issue. Migration often stems from humanitarian crises, economic instability, or violence, and treating it as an emergency could overshadow the need for empathy and long-term solutions.
True, and that brings up another question. Should laws created for war be used to address systemic issues like migration? Or does this approach bypass the root causes altogether?
That's a critical question. Addressing root causes, poverty, conflict, climate change, is key to reducing migration pressures. Using wartime laws might offer a quick fix, but risks ignoring the bigger picture.
And let's not forget the legal challenges. The article points out that this strategy has faced significant pushback, with critics arguing it violates constitutional rights and international agreements. What's your take on that?
I think they're right to raise concerns. Applying wartime laws to deport migrants could infringe on rights like due process or asylum protection. It could also strain relationships with other nations, especially those directly impacted by U.S. deportation policies.
Speaking of international relationships, this approach reflects on the U.S.'s global image? Does it strengthen its stance on border control or erode its reputation as a champion of human rights?
Honestly, it's a double-edged sword. While some might view it as the U.S. taking a firm stance on immigration, others could see it as undermining humanitarian values. It risks sending a message that national security trumps human dignity.
That's sobering to think about. But let's shift gears for a moment. What about the political implications? The article suggests that this approach might appeal to certain voter bases while alienating others. Do you think it's all about politics?
Politics definitely play a role. Immigration has long been a polarizing issue, and using wartime laws could energize certain voters. But it's also a gamble, as it might alienate moderates or those who prioritize human rights.
So, in the end, it boils down to balancing security, legality, and humanity. Do you think it's possible to strike that balance, or are we always going to struggle with these trade-offs?
It's a tough balancing act, but I believe it's possible, with thoughtful policymaking that respects legal boundaries and human dignity. It requires leaders to look beyond short-term fixes and focus on sustainable solutions.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up today's discussion. This is such a multifaceted issue, and I'm sure it's something we'll revisit in the future.
Definitely. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to check out the article for more details. Until next time.